Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. Hi. My name is Gaëlle Morel, and I'm the exhibitions curator of the Ryerson Image Centre. On behalf of our director, Paul Roth, and our team at the RIC, I would like to thank you for coming out tonight. It is my privilege to present our fall Howard and Carol Tanenbaum Lecture. Our speaker tonight is Isabelle Hayeur, whose work is featured in the Edge of the Earth, Climate Change in Photography and Video, our current exhibition downstairs at the RIC. Increasingly and forebodingly, artists are turning their attention to the subject of climate change in poignant and often confrontational ways. The Edge of the Earth features recent and historic work by a range of pioneering and visionary artists from around the world. Photojournalism from the RIC's famed Black Star collection is also included in the exhibition, contextualizing artistic reflections alongside half a century of historical reportage on the environment. Guest curated by a Montreal-based art historian, Dr. Bénédicte Ramade, this in-depth exhibition attempts to foster a reconsideration of climate change, envisioning the present crisis and future consequences of humanity's harsh imprint on our planet. Bénédicte will be giving a tour of the exhibition on Wednesday, November 16 at 6 p.m. Our public programs are free and open to all, so please, if you can, come and join us. I would like to take this opportunity tonight to offer a great thanks to the Tanenbaums for their ongoing generous support, and to our partners in the School of Image Arts and the Faculty of Communication, Art and Design, led by Chair Blake Fitzpatrick and Dean Charles Falzon. I'd like to add one program note before we begin with tonight's lecture. After her talk, Isabelle will open up the floor for a Q&A session. Please note that we will provide a microphone for any audience members who would like to ask a question, as we are live streaming tonight's lecture online. Now I would like to briefly introduce you to Isabelle Hayeur. Isabelle is a Canadian artist who lives and works in Quebec. Political and poetic, her work focuses on the evolution of places and communities in the context of current neoliberal sociopolitics, probing the relationships between nature and culture. Her large-scale photographs and experimental videos document altered landscapes, industrial areas, tourist sites, abandoned places, urban fringes, and underprivileged regions, with prevalent themes of alienation, uprooting, and disenchantment. Hayeur's work has been shown nationally and internationally and resides in many collections, including those of the National Gallery of Canada, the Fonds National d'Art Contemporain in Paris, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago. And she is represented by Hugues Charbonneau in Montreal. Finally, it is our pleasure to announce that Isabelle's photograph, included in The Edge of the Earth and entitled Quaternary 4 Anthropocene from the series Excavations, has been recently acquired by the RIC. And please join me now in welcoming Isabelle Hayeur.
Thanks, Gaëlle, and thanks to you for being here. I have a practice in photography, video, and site-specific art. My art practice is situated within a critical approach to the environment, urban development, and to social conditions. My work seeks to show how we take possession of territories and being so as to adapt them to our own needs. Today, this instrumental logic tends to invade all fields of human activity. The point of view I often take is that of the marginalized territories and communities. For this talk, I will focus only on my photo works. I have used both documentary photography and digital manipulation. My approach is experimental as I try to renew my practice and to explore new topics. I have prepared a survey of what I have done so far since the beginning of my art practice in '96. I will show my photo series, but also my residency projects. The works are not displayed in chronological order, but rather on how they relate to each other. From 1998 to 2002, I have created 3 bodies of work titled Uncertain Landscape, Drift, and Foundation. There is 21 photographs in total in these series. My first project were all seamless digital collage. I merged different sites into a single space. They had no real existence, but appear familiar like those we see every day. I used photomontage to reflect on real-life alteration and to show the impact we have on the world we live in. By exposing the alterations of our ecosystems, it highlights our ability to change the course of things. These first images were mainly created from photographs of hydroelectric reservoir, dam river, wasteland, and construction site. Like the landscape they are based on, they represent nature reworked. And this is called a l'île, and that's the first image I created. And it was a sand pit, and I create a fake lake out of it. We live in a manufactured world, and it is sometimes difficult to distinguish the natural and the man-made. The manipulation of images become a commentary on the artificiality of the landscape around us. It's easy to miss the fact that these landscapes are the result of alteration because they easily blend with our original models. In some ways, they've become our nature, and they lend themselves just as well to outdoor activities. Around that time, I also documented the suburban periphery and industrial sites. This one is right in the middle of Laval. It's near Montreal. A very strange site. It used to be a rock quarry. And industrial development has created many of these disenchanted and inhospitable spaces that we see here. I find these places fascinating and frightening at the same time. Our contemporary condition finds perfect expression in these dehumanized places. In the years 2003 and 2004, I have worked on a series titled Destination. I have created 12 large panoramic work in this series. It is based on photos of North American tourist attraction, nature preserve and towns. I have documented Cape Cod, the Everglades, the Mojave Desert, and other places. These two were created from Cape Cod and the Everglades, but they also have parts that are in Quebec, in Japan. Some images were found on the web. It's a little bit of everywhere. I tried to build them of paradoxical sites. I often mix the landscape, the pristine landscape, with the non-picturesque event. They look kind of situated between a chaotic industrial site and the postcards. These works draw attention to our ambivalent attitude toward the world, our desire to control it, as well as our desire to become immersed in it. These two were created one after another, so I've used the same part, but they are both highly constructed. They were made from Cape Cod and the Mojave Desert. I usually show them in a corner, in the same room in an exhibition, not too far from one another. my idea was to create a landscape that has changed after a climate change, for example, or a landscape that was transformed by irrigation, by a human action. Between 2005 and 2008, I worked on a series titled Excavation. 11 images were created in this series. The term excavation can refer to work in construction, road building or drilling, but as well as archaeology. In this series, I have sought to unify these different meanings. I have combined fossiliferous sites with landscape shaped by economic needs. The works contain new housing development combined with UNESCO World Heritage Site. These two were created one after another. They use the same two images, and in one I use the top of one photograph and the bottom of another one, and the reverse in the next picture. And in these two montages, the scale is different. What I photographed in the Badlands were like many kilometers large, so it's very immense. And then what I took from the suburban development was the scale was much smaller, maybe 1 kilometer. And I did that because I thought to reverse the hierarchy, that what was immense and immutable becomes vulnerable, and what is usually insignificant becomes more important. This is the work that is on the show right now. It was created from the Alberta Badlands near Drumheller and a former dump site located in Montreal. It used to be the second largest dump in North America. Here we see a detail of the image. My idea in this work was to have two different visions opposed. One, a retrospective approach, and one that is more prospective but less concerned with permanency. Between 2008 and 2015, I worked on a series titled Underworld. I have 70 images in this series, so it's a large body of work. This series was, the point of departure was a personal experience because I grew up near a river. And I've seen the river becoming very polluted with the years. And I observed the transformation and the change in the ecosystem. I wanted for a long time to create a body of work that would bear witness to these man-made upheavals. The project started in the fall of 2008. I was in southern Florida, in Miami Beach, and I had a watertight tank that allowed me to photograph underwater. And I left the crystal clear water to the vacationer, and I preferred to catch the turbid water, the polluted water of the navigation canals. And since then, I've been mostly diving into troubled waters of uncertain origin. 80% of bodies of water on the planet are polluted today. That's a lot. And I think personally that the declining state of the body of water is certainly among the most worrisome environmental issue. This one was shot in Ontario in Grand River. This algae is named Spirogyra. On the surface of a body of water, this algae is quite repulsive, but under the surface, I find it beautiful. They serve as indicators of water pollution and fecal contamination. This species becomes invasive in some of our rivers and lakes, and when there is too much sewage in it, they can invade the whole body of water. The following images were taken in a Navy graveyard in Staten Island, not too far from the New York Harbor. What we see at the horizon is called the chemical coast of New Jersey. Part of this body of water is a dead zone during the summer because of lack of oxygen. This is one of the ships in the Navy graveyard. There's a lot of boats of all epochs and sizes there, and they just rot in the water waiting to be dismantled. I was lucky to go there before Hurricane Sandy because after, most of them were gone. The foggy and blurry appearance that we see on these images are not the result of weather condition at all. It is created because the water is so dirty and contains oil and other substances that makes a layer on my underwater housing. Sometimes at the end of a shooting, my equipment is very dirty, so I basically photograph through a layer of crap. And I like it because it tells what it has to tell. This is Bayou Terrebonne in Houma, Louisiana. It is the most polluted bayou in Louisiana. I was with an environmentalist, and he was taking water sample, and he studied this bayou because it's especially polluted. This is Don River in Toronto. This is also very, very polluted, and we have a detail here where we see all the traces, oil, and it was extremely dirty. I had trouble to clean it after. Between 2004 and 2007, I created the Model Home series. There is 10 images in total. The image in this series were constructed using photographs of suburban houses and model homes. It's an investigation into contemporary suburbs, and it paints also a portrait of our society. I photographed different types of dwellings, modest homes and more upscale residencies, and I then alter each house and reposition it in a new context. Each of my models a portrait that develop different aspects of our relationship between our society and the land they use. We can see some similarities between my virtual models and the models found in the catalog of contractors. But my location and models are however, more disturbing and strange. Because the goal in this project was not to shape things in order to attract a clientele, but rather to be critical towards this phenomenon. This model home name is Roxanne, and my models have women's name because it's a common practice in this industry. And this one is a portrait of suburban solitude and isolation. It's a Nuit Américaine, so it was shot during the day, and then I created the night around it. It's a house that has no door, only one window where we see only the television light and a satellite dish, so it's totally like isolated from the rest of the community. This starter castle was created from a real French Château de la Loire and a monster home. I like very much the monster homes. They're everywhere in my work. This is another one, a Mec mansion near Mont-Tremblant Resort. Mont-Tremblant is a ski resort in Quebec, and it used to be a very small, typical village, but now they have an international airport for tourists. And the people who grew up in the village cannot afford a house anymore because of speculation. At the back of the house, we see the pedestrian village with restaurant and boutique. It's a real village, it's really there, but it's a fake village. So it's a simulated village. That is, we can call it fake authentic. It's a pastiche of Swiss Alp village. And I find that many new developments have no connection to the original context of the sites. They are amalgams of cultural, imaginary, and borrowed identities. We see a picturesque feature fabricated, pseudo-heritage values are invented, and the target is clients who like to think they're buying something special with a local flavor. I find these generate false perception of who we are. This is a special project I did for Oakville Galleries. The title of the work is Somewhere Out of a Memory. So it's an edition of 25, it's only one image. What I did is I wanted to show the transformation in Oakville, the urban transformation. So I photographed from the lake, the most historical part, and I went in many different locations, and then I created kind of a condensed view of Oakville with the new developments. So we see the more historical part and the more recent part. I think there's like 50 different shots that I took with a very small digital camera. This is a residency project created for L'Espace F. It's an artist-run center dedicated to photography, and it's located in Matane in Gaspésie. The title of the project is Une vie sans histoire. It was created in 2012 and 2013, and there's 16 works in this series. It's a documentary project. What we see here is Le Quartier 1030 in Brossard. It's on the south shore of Montreal. It's an area where farmland is giving way to a field of dwellings. What used to be farmlands have disappeared to make way for real estate developments. What is now growing on these fertile soil is vast shopping centers, condos, and luxury houses. And it's huge, it's really big, and they even have a problem because during the summer it's a hot zone because there's so much concrete and asphalt, then it's becoming too hot. Between 2008 and 2011, in this area, 15 heritage houses like this one have been demolished or deliberately set on fire. Only this house is left, and it's oddly contrasting with its surroundings. It is right in the middle of an enclave of identical condos. And the guy who owns it refused to sell it to the promoters, and he's the really last one. And he wants to give the house to the city if they make an history museum with the house. Now we see this house compared to one of the starter castle. In this area, the development are named Parisian Village, Gates of London, and the streets' names are Limoges, Liverpool, Lausanne, Lugano. And I wonder what they have to do with the local culture or what is left of it. This is another residency project created in 2006 and 2007. I was commissioned by Noorderlijk Photography and the Walhouse number 2 in Groningen in Holland. And 12 images were created. I was invited to make an artist residency in the Walhouse. So I lived there for 2 weeks. It's a very special house created by architect John Edock. Edock was an architect who spent much of his life in New York City, where he teach at Cooper Union. His architectures, but also his drawings and poems, are ontological questioning, and I find it very interesting. So for him, the dwelling becomes a place of reflection and meditation on existence, like a sanctuary. He also believed in the conception of architecture as part of the social contract. I created a series of images that seek to establish a resonance with his thinking. John Edock wrote something I found very interesting. He said, "You should bring the devils into your own house as a way to challenge both society and one deep-held assumptions." At the time, I was working on the model home series, and I was visiting new housing development full of monster homes. So I thought, let's bring the Walhouse into these developments. The montage you see here could never exist in reality because the real estate developers would not allow such a house to be built in their standardized projects. Thus, the Walhouse is playing the role of a troublemaker. This is another residency project created in Quebec City and commissioned by Centre Vue. It was created in 2007 and 2006, and 6 large works were created. That's not my work, it's an image I found on the internet. That's an archival image. It's a view of the former Saint-Vincent-de-Paul church. It's a neoclassical structure that was left abandoned for 20 years. And then it was demolished without a permit by a real estate developer. When I photographed it in 2007, only the facade of the church remained, and there was a big controversy around its demolition. Some people were advocating to save it. That's also an image found on the internet, so not my work. It's to show that very close to where that church is located, it's the old Quebec, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's protected. And it's good that it's protected, but it is also a tourist area, and everything is too neat and too tidy, and the new signs are all done in old-fashioned style, and they're many boutiques, and everything is too dressed up to appeal to tourist eyes, and I find that heritage sites look fake. So I chose several of these urban landscapes that are very emblematic of old Quebec, and I meld them with the ruins of the old church that was demolished. Here I replaced the fresco. It's a trompe-l'œil fresco called La Fresque des Québécois. So I replaced it with my own digital trompe-l'œil using the remains of the demolished church. The idea was to associate places of memory, historical architecture, and picturesque attraction with a more dissonant form of local color. in order to expose the artificiality of the historic district. Here I moved the church into La Place Royale, where the oldest church in North America is located. And the church is called Notre-Dame des Victoires, but here I replaced it. And here I moved it on Les Plaines d'Abraham in Le Parc des Champs de Bataille, where the historical fight between the British and the French Empire occurred. This is one project that I did for one show at La Galerie de l'UQAM. The title is Tabula Rasa. It was a special exhibition for the 14th anniversary of Université du Québec à Montréal. And it was about the university and its importance in Quebec society over 4 decades. I chose to work with an archival image of 1973 found at UQAM Library. And it was showing the demolition of the Saint-Jacques Church. When they built UQAM, they demolished a church. There was also a controversy around it, so they kept only a facade and they built the university around it. It's not very pretty. So I had the idea of making the war images of UQAM because it was kind of a war against historic building in this neighborhood because the whole neighborhood was destroyed a lot. So I mixed the archival image with an image found on the internet showing an aerial view of the World War II. It's a city demolished during World War II in Europe. Here we see a detail. This part of Montreal, le Quartier Latin, was very prosperous until the 40s. And then it entered a long period of decline, and many Victorian homes were turned down. They made space for a wider street, office building, or they were turned into parking lots. For more than 30 years, the Quartier Latin has experienced a decay and successive redevelopment. This is a residency project realized in Brussels in 2008-2009. 9 large images were created. It was commissioned by l'Espace photographique Contre-type in Brussels and Vox, Centre de l'Image Contemporaine in Montreal. During my residency in Brussels, I look at the phenomenon that they call the Brusselization. Urbanists call it this way. They call it the anarchic development of cities left to the whims of the real estate developers. It was particularly glaring in the 60s and 70s when Brussels was given to a vision of a city of the future. It is still in evidence today, especially with the development of the European institution in Brussels. Going through them, I experienced feeling of alienation and uprootedness. But I also discovered Brussels from a wholly different angle, inhabited and historic. So I had the idea of creating a body of work that would combine both. Using the social statuary to a point, I transformed them, giving new meaning to monuments from another era. So I moved them into construction sites. My montage seemed to commemorate the leveling of local memory. They also reference to human tragedy and the struggle against oppression. Rehabilitated in this way within the urban fabric, they are now turned into gadfly and symbols of resistance. Here we see a detail. The social statuary in Brussels is especially interesting because they have statues for ordinary people, like the worker, the cleaning ladies, and other of these people. This is an image found on the internet, and it shows a monument that is in Le Parc du Cinquantenaire in Brussels. That's an important park there. And it's a monument named the Belgian Dynasty and the Congo. The relief on this plaque depicts Belgium's first 5 kings, Leopold I, II, Albert I, Leopold III, and Baudouin I. There's an inscription on it, homage to the Belgian Dynasty and the Congo, Gratitude, 1931. Whether the Congo feels as grateful to the Belgian dynasty as they feel towards it is another question. So I transformed the monument using a derelict wall in a poor neighborhood in Brussels. I wanted to create a monument that would be more real, that would bear witness of the cruelty and suffering endured by the Congolese people when it was a Belgian colony. This is a body of work titled Nuit Américaine. It was created between 2004 and 2008, and 13 images were realized. These images take a fairly wide variety of form. There's a panorama, architectural photography, indoor scenes. Their source is landscape in Canada, in the States, Mexico, Argentina. They depict the change that are occurring at the same time throughout the Americas in today's context of a global economy. This is a reconstruct view of one of the poorest neighborhoods in Buenos Aires. At the back, we can see the downtown where the foreign multinational control the economy. This image is about gentrification. I constructed using a new housing project in Toronto many years ago, and a view of a quite poor neighborhood in Queens, New York. But it could be anywhere, actually. I wanted to make an image that would exemplify the invasive nature of gentrification and the capitalist ideology behind it. This is a very recent series of photographs. It's a documentary project. It's titled Desert Shores. I just finished a show in Montreal with it, the first show, because I was there like a few months ago in the desert. There's also a video. I have 93 images in this series. This is an image found on the internet to show you what is the Salton Sea, the region where I went to do the project. It is south of Palm Springs in the southern Californian desert. Salton Sea is a salt lake located on the San Andreas Fault. It's an arid depression of California that is situated below sea level, and it was accidentally created at the beginning of the last century when the Colorado River overflowed its banks. It was a very popular tourist attraction in the 50s and 60s. It was a paradise for fishermen and yachts, club, and marinas. But then the area underwent significant economic and population growth. But then they observe that the lake, the water level dropped and the salinity rose, so the mirage gradually faded. Today, the surrounding of the Salton Sea is mostly deserted and desolated. That's a photograph that I re-photographed in the motel where I was staying. There's only 3 motels there. And the owner of the motels inherited the motel from his grandparent, and the photographs were always there. And as the sea was vanishing and the landscape was becoming desolated, the photograph was being altered, and I found it very interesting. In this area, we found mostly no man's land and ghost town today. The water is now polluted by alluvial deposit, saturated with fertilizer and pesticide. There are regularly algae bloom that are killing the fish. And the smell there is terrible. Beach resorts have given way to trailer parks now, so it's home for the poor, the marginalized, and the Mexican immigrant. They're like other dire of poverty found all across the States. It's a third world of their own, where the most destitute live for lack of a better alternative. I found that the surrounding of the Salton Sea were very interesting because they raise so many questions. They are loaded with social, political, environmental, and metaphoric implications. They seem to mirror a lost America, an era in which everything seemed possible and accessible for all citizens. This is a residency project created in Strasbourg, France. It was commissioned by La Chambre, and there is an art center dedicated to photography in Strasbourg. And the title of the project is Corps étranger, foreign body, and there's 36 images in this body of work. I had 3 weeks to do this residency, so it was really short. I walked in Strasbourg and then I explored the European quarter. Like Brussels, there's also a European quarter in Strasbourg. And it's located northwest of the city. And there's an interesting landscape issue, urban issue, social in this area. So I was attracted to it naturally. The building at the back is the European Parliament. And their soulless contemporary architecture look to me like if it's totally disconnected from the rest of the city. This is the building of the European Court of Human Rights, and it stands in sharp contrast with the rustic quarter surrounding it. There's a lot of these very cold concrete architecture with surveillance camera, many walls, closed gates. It's very brutal. Near the European Parliament and the European Court of Human Rights, there's a lot of protesters and immigrants that camp there, and they're waiting to be heard at the court. So they all have different stories, and I spoke with many of them. Some are waiting for be accepted in Europe. They need some papers, and some people are totally crazy. This lady was, she was insane. The presence of these protester immigrants near the European Parliament became for me a more general expression of disenchantment and indignation. They seem to be telling another story, that of Europe deprived people and the marginalized of the global economy we know today. As I see them, these government quarters have something about them that speak to us of another Europe. Maybe not the one ordinary citizen had dreamed of, though. The legitimacy of the European Union was supposed to be based on prosperity and fairness for all. But today, its citizens are called upon to make sacrifice of their standard of living while multinationals are thriving. Here we see some of the signs of a guy that was also crazy. I think I was almost afraid when he spoke to me. And this is one of the judges that he didn't like. So this is the last project that I will show tonight. It was created during an artist residency in France, and it was commissioned by les Rencontres Internationales de la Photographie en Gaspésie and Diaphane in France. I was in Paris when the November 2015 attacks occurred. I was there just like that. I happened to visit Paris to do this residency project, and I had another idea first. But when it arrived, it was hard to think of something else, and everybody was talking about that, and then the whole France was totally paralyzed. So I decided to make my project on the Paris attack and the aftermath, and to look at what had changed in the city, and try to understand also while photographing. So I observed the reaction, I listened on the conversation, and I took picture of what I saw a little bit everywhere. This is on the second night. The first night, people were told not to go outside, it was too dangerous. And it's near the Bataclan, where it was all closed by policemen. This is on Boulevard Voltaire, where people gather, not too far from the Bataclan. There were all kind of reactions. Some people came with signs to protest. And here this guy is saying that, okay, this is extremely sad, it's terrible, but let's not forget that there were like 6 million people dead in the Congo. And Place de la République became an agora where the citizens moved with placards. People were in shock. They were putting forward hypotheses, the hazard explanation. What was interesting, it was recreating social ties that are cruelly lacking in our society. This woman was reading a letter, and I could read the letter in Photoshop. If you zoom, you can read the text, and it's a guy who had met this girl who died at the Bataclan, and they were dating for not a very long time, and he's writing a love letter to this girl who died. Le monument à la République became a makeshift memorial, and I took a picture of it every day because it was changing all the time. It was never the same. It was done and undone as fresh flowers and new photographs were put there. And also it really changed when there was wind, rain, sun, and everything was put there. Like there were like a photograph, drawing, small posters, letters. I photograph a lot of photos of people who died there. What I found mostly interesting was when it was raining, it would deform the picture and it would blur them. It would erase some of the word or spread the ink. And in the process, it gave them a new appearance, often more poignant than the original, a kind of battered look. This is the book Paris est une fête by Hemingway, and someone had left it at République, and this book is a kind of a love letter to Paris. At the same time, everywhere in Paris, the territory was under high surveillance, and security was being reinforced everywhere. Bags were searched, leather jacket had to be opened, and you had to give your identity card. Now, anyone could be suspected in church. Some popular demonstrations were even forbidden. And a frightened population accept these measures more easily. I thought history repeat itself. In 1793, under the Terror, a period of violence that occurred after the onset of the French Revolution, the law of suspect was voted in France, making a clear weakening of respect for individual freedoms. Today, these needful severities are again being imposed. Et voilà.
Do you have any questions?
Thanks very much for a really great survey of just one small part of your work. But I was wondering about the last body of work. You felt compelled to approach it in a very documentary, almost photojournalistic mode.
Yeah.
And I wondered if, with the distance of time, if these images have at all, in your mind, been considered to become part of other images that might meld with in the collage-like forms that you've worked so often in the past. Do you see these as finished works, or do you see them as raw material potentially for future works?
It's a good question. They might be using for other purpose. I'm not sure. I wanted to try something new that I had never done, like working with people so close after tragedy, like you said, more a journalistic approach. And I thought, let's do it. And I made a book really quickly. And I thought I'll see after what come with this work. But I wanted to do it just to try something new as an experiment. But I may use them for their purpose. In this series, there's a lot of picture in this series, so I didn't show all of them. There's some that are digital collage, yeah, but I didn't show them. But I've used also a little bit of photo montage.
I was just wondering, in the collage works, the landscape and urban collages, when one sees them for real, like sees the image itself, can you tell that it's collaged, or do you have a sense that something is off, or you think the viewer would think it is a document of an existing place?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. The first work where it was like seamless collage, you could not tell it was not a documentary, and then people would see them as real landscape, and then they would read the artist's statement and then found out that they were constructed. So then they would have another reflection on it. They would see that they didn't see something, and they were really about what we don't see. Later, I made a collage that were all seamless and very credible, very. But then you had a little bit of traces that you could see in another image that I've used the same fragment, and then so people who would look subtly would see that they were collage. And but I really wanted to create trompe-l'œil work because then you look at them for what they are, and then after, when you know that they are constructed, you have another layer of reflection after.
What struck me as interesting in some of the Paris photos is that even though you're describing it as photojournalism, it seems that there are some built-in collage characteristics. Like this particular one, it's as if your eye is drawn to situations in which either humans or humans and nature interacting have created a collage, and then you're capturing that one, and then the one of the Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, which had been altered by the rain. And then, in a sense, it's maybe the same impulse, but just coming out in a different way.
Yeah, in a sense, they were like the one I preferred in this series were the one that were transformed. They were transformed by nature. But yeah, you're right, totally.
One last question. Okay, well, thank you so much, Isabelle, for a great lecture. Thank you all for coming tonight. Have a great night.